Hi, welcome to the Itihas channel. Om Namah Shivaya, Om Nagendraya Namaha, Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Amme Narayana, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Anjaneyaya Namaha, Om Guruve Namaha. Today, we go back 2 generations in the Kuru dynasty. We go back to King Shantanu, the son of King Pratipa. King Shantanu was 14th in line in the Kuru dynasty after Bharata. He was a great king, a brave man, handsome man, broad shouldered, huge limbed, tall, strode the earth like Indra himself. In fact, many people likened himself to Indra, the king of the gods. Extremely brave warrior, went on campaigns all across Bharatavarsha, got all the kings of Bharatavarsha to accept the kingdom of Hastinapur as the king of kingdom which led all the other kings. In the course of his campaigns, many great kingdoms wanted his match as a relative. They offered their beautiful young princesses to him in marriage, hoping that by this the kingdom of Hastinapur would be related to these other kingdoms of Bharatvarsha. But Shantanu had absolutely no interest in taking a wife. From his childhood, he used to have dreams of a beautiful woman who would come all the time in his dreams. A woman of exceptional beauty, a divine beauty not seen in mortal Bhuloka. And if there was only one woman he ever wanted, it was this woman of his dreams, this woman who came in his dreams from his childhood, and he refused to marry. When he would come back from these great campaigns of war, Shantanu would want to rest, and his way of meditation and peace was hunting. Shantanu took up hunting in its truest form, alone, just by himself, sometimes on a horse, sometimes on foot. The thrill of the hunt lay in tracking, following, smelling the air, seeing the breeze, going after the animals silently with just a bow and a knife. A bow, an arrow, and a knife are the only things he would use in the hunt. He would track the animal quietly through the forest. He would stay downwind so that the animals wouldn't get a whiff of his body odor. And quietly, without making a sound, he would track the animal, and at the opportune time, he would let loose an arrow. And if the animal was injured and not killed, he would run behind and give it a sweet death so that it wouldn't suffer with his knife. Most kings who would go on hunts would go with large retinues, and there would be people who would beating drums, scaring the animal into a corner, and another set of people who would surround the animal so that only one way would be there for the animal to escape, and the king would be lying there with a bow, ready to fire at this trapped animal in fear. But where was the pleasure in that? The real hunt would be full of danger, where you could be the one who was hunted by the animal. And there would be a time, and there have been times when Shantanu was attacked by leopards, by cheetahs, and by other animals of the forest and narrowly escaped, just purely because of brute strength and skill with his knife. One such day he went on a hunt, and the hunt was futile. Twice he missed a beautiful stag and once a leopard. Any normal man would have just turned back in frustration, but not Shantanu. Shantanu knew the beauty of the hunt, and he persisted in the hunt. He went far and wide until his horse was tired, and so was he. Thirsty and tired, he came to the great river Janvi. the great river Ganga, Jannavi, the other name for Ganga. He reached its banks and saw the beautiful, sparkling river, clear, absolutely clear, so clear that you could see the pebbles on the bed of the river. The river was so wide at the point that you couldn't see the far banks. He stopped at the edge of the river Ganga, splashed his face, drank from the water, and allowed his horse to drink from the water. And as he was drinking, he could feel a presence around him. Turning back, he saw the most glorious vision, the most beautiful woman standing there at the edge of the river Jannavi. This was the woman he's been having dreams of from when he was a child. This was the woman of his dreams, and he knew her like she belonged to him. He stood up and looked into her eyes. They were black, with the river cascading through those eyes, her blue-black hair cascading behind her, flowing like the tresses of the river Ganga next to her. He could feel the rhythm of the Ganga match her rhythm. He could feel the rhythm of her soul match the rhythm of the Ganga. And he was speechless. She was absolutely perfect in form and feature and figure. Words failed him. Shantanu stood up, put his hand out to this woman, not knowing what to say. She took his hand in hers and smiled at him. She was playing with her tresses and looking at him in deep emotion. All the words that could come out at that time from Shantanu's mouth was, "Would you marry me?" Nothing else. And this woman, who was wearing a dress which looked like the moss of the earth, smiled back at him, bit her lips, and said, "Yes, I would, O great king. But I have a few conditions. You are not to ask me who I am. You are not to question my actions. Treat me well, but never ever ask me about anything I do. And I will remain faithful to you for the rest of our lives. I will remain faithful to you and never break your heart. But you have to promise me this. Never ask me who I am, and never ask me what I do and why I do something." There was no question of refusing these conditions, and Shantanu said yes. He immediately took her in his chariot and went back to Hastinapur. And the city rejoiced that their king had finally found a woman, and there would finally be an heir to the throne who would take the great Kuru dynasty forward. Pandu was overjoyed. There was a wedding of magnanimous proportions, and Pandu found bliss in the arms of this woman. He called her Ganga, not knowing what her real name was, because he found her at the banks of the great river Ganga, the great river Jannavi. Ganga is called Jannavi because she is the daughter of Rishi Janu, hence Jannavi. And he called her Ganga and spent many months in absolute bliss with her. Sometimes the kingdom may have suffered a little, as Shantanu did not spend too much time in its administration, but he had an able team to take care of the kingdom, and the kingdom ran well in his absence. In some time, Ganga got pregnant, and Shantanu announced a month-long celebration in the kingdom in honor of Ganga's pregnancy. But somehow during this pregnancy, Ganga's mood changed. She would be alone in her room, not wanting to spend time with Shantanu. She would cry often, and he would come into the room seeing her crying bitterly all alone. He would want to ask her what it was, but knew her conditions and would stop right there. He would see that she would be in a bad mood quite often, and he put it down to the problems of pregnancy. He would give her space. He would pamper her where she would be acceptable. At times, she would just rush into his arms and sob. and not knowing what to do, he would just hug her. Finally, the day came when Ganga would give birth. Shantanu was excited and he ran to her rooms to see the child that was born from Ganga. And when he burst into the rooms, he noticed the room was completely deserted and empty. He asked the maids outside, what happened? Where was Ganga? And she said the moment the child was born, she took the child on a chariot and rode towards the river. And she made them promise that she wouldn't tell anyone where she rode. Shantanu immediately took his horse and rode hard towards the river in the direction that Ganga had gone. He knew she had a lead, an hour's lead over him, but he knew he would catch up. He was a great horseman. And just as he reached the river Ganga in the same place where he first met her, he saw her standing at the edge of the river. He got out from his horse and stood behind a tree and listened in. There he could hear his beloved wife Ganga talking in an ancient fluid tongue, a language long lost. They say a language which was as old as the earth herself, talking to the river, holding the child in her arms, tears streaming down her face, and talking in this ancient language to the river Jahnavi. And then holding that child up with a scream like her heart was pulled out of her body, she cast the child into the river. Shantanu was shocked. He came out from the bushes and looked at her. She immediately turned round, saw him, was not surprised he was there, just looked at him and said, "Remember your oath, O king, remember your oath," rushed to him and sobbing terribly, hugged him and went into his arms. Shantanu didn't know what to say. He was devastated. He was shocked. This was his wife Ganga, who was as tender and as gentle as a woman could ever be. She wouldn't hurt an ant if it was there. She wouldn't hurt any being. She had asked him to stop going hunting, for she didn't want to hurt the animals of the forest. And because of her, Shantanu had stopped going on the hunt. Of course, he never felt the need with Ganga next to him. And yet, this was a woman who cast the child into the river. He brought her back to the palace. People were excitedly asking about the prince. And they said that no, the child was born with some bad deformity due to a previous curse. And they had to go to the forest to give it to a rishi to take care of the child. And people believed that story. And then Shantanu went about. And then Ganga came back to her true self. She immersed herself in Shantanu's well-being, and Shantanu forgot about this first child. Over time, Ganga became pregnant again. And the same cycle repeated. She would be crying through her pregnancy. She would be angry, moody, alone, dejected most of the time. And every time she gave birth, in the middle of the night or early hours of morning, she would take a chariot and rush to the river. And Shantanu would ride hard behind her, hoping to catch up. And he would stand behind the trees and watch helplessly as she cast the child again and again back into the river. When she used to speak that ancient language, somewhere deep inside he felt he knew it, but he couldn't say how and where and why. 7 children were born. 7 children were cast into the river Jahnavi. Finally, Ganga was pregnant again for the 8th time. The same thing repeated. Her mood was always bad. She would cry uncontrollably. Sometimes she would cry in Shantanu's arms, and sometimes she would refuse to meet Shantanu. Over time, it was time to give birth. Shantanu knew that the child will be born sometime in the morning. So much before the birth of the child, Shantanu rode into the forest and positioned himself near the river where he first met his beautiful wife Ganga. sure enough, Ganga came there with the eighth child. Almost ignoring him, almost not seeing him, she walked past him in a trance, in a daze, like he didn't exist at that point. She walked to the river and started speaking that strange tongue. But this time Shantanu was not having any of it. He stopped her and said, "No, stop. What is it this that you do? What is this evil thing that comes over you when you have a child? Why do you cast these beautiful innocent children into the river? What is it? Tell me who you are. Are you a Rakshasi? Are you a demon? Are you someone from the nether worlds? Who are you? Tell me who you are, Ganga." And Ganga looked at him and smiled. Tears rolled down her eyes. She knew her time was up. She told the king, "You broke your oath, O king. You wanted this child more than you wanted me. I will tell you everything. I will tell you the entire story. Take this child, O king. This child is yours." And Shantanu took this beautiful, handsome child in his arms. The child as beautiful and handsome as Ganga herself, with the ripples of the river Janvi flowing through his face. The most handsome child he had ever seen, and hugged the child. And then Ganga told him the story of why she did what she did. And she told him that many, 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 many years ago, many generations ago, in the time of Treta Yuga, when the Devaloka was very close to Bhuloka, and kings and princesses and rishis used to often go from Bhuloka to Devaloka and come back. There was a great king who was your ancestor, O Shantanu. This king was called Mahabhisha or Mahabhisheka. Both names are used in the Mahabharata. Mahabhisha was an excellent king who had ruled over Bhuloka and Bharatavarsha brilliantly and bravely. He had attained great powers, and he was deemed by Indra as his equal. And Indra used to often invite him to Devaloka to be present in the court proceedings. On one such day, in the great hall of Indra called Sudharma, made by the great architect Vishwakarma himself, the great divine architect of the gods, the great divine architect of Devaloka, Vishwakarma, had himself made the great hall of Sudharma, where Indra used to hold court. On that day, Mahabhisha was there, as princely as ever, along with all the other devas in that time. And there, this beautiful, gorgeous Jannavi, Ganga, came into the courtroom. Absolutely beautiful. And her gaze went to Mahabhisha. And the moment she saw him, she was struck with love. And she didn't know what had gotten over her. She just stared at him, and he stared back at her, lost in her gaze. It was love at first sight, and she couldn't control herself. Unknown to her, a gentle breeze that blew the top part of her garment off, and the top part of her bosom was exposed. Immediately, all the other devas in shame lowered their eyes and looked down, because they knew her modesty was open. But not Mahabhisheka, not Mahabhisha. He just went on staring into Ganga's eyes, and Ganga staring into his, unknown to what was happening around them. And Indra saw this. The great Jannavi, Ganga herself, partially disrobed and not bothering to cover herself back up, lost in the eyes of Mahabhisha, and Mahabhisha himself not caring to lower down his eyes, looking back at Ganga and admiring her. And that ego of Indra came up and he thought, how dare this mortal human being from Bhuloka look at the great Jahnavi this way? How dare he insult the gods? And he cursed Mahabhisha that he will spend an entire lifetime back again on earth. An entire lifetime he will spend back there. And then he looked at Jahnavi and Ganga and cursed her too, that she will also spend an entire lifetime. If they wanted to be together so much, they should spend that lifetime in earth with all its ills and travails and troubles. Immediately they came back to their conscious sense. Ganga covered herself. Mahabhisha felt embarrassed. And they both begged Indra for mercy. Indra softened with time and said, I cannot stop my curse. My curse will take place. But I can offer you some solace. Let Ganga's life not be as long as it should be as a human life, but Mahabhisheka should have his entire life on earth. But in that life, Mahabhisheka will be born to the great King Prathipa of the Kuru dynasty. And he will live a life and shall be remembered for as long as time exists. This is all I can make as a modification to my curse. And they accepted and went off. Somewhere around that time, the great Rishi Vashishta, who was one of the Sapta Rishis, he was doing a lot of penance on the Meru mountain, the holy mountain of Meru. On those grassy slopes was his ashrama. And in that ashrama was the divine cow Nandini and her calf. It was said that whoever drank the milk of Nandini would live immortally, would not know death, would not know suffering, would not know sorrow and harm. And in this beautiful ashrama, Vashishta lived with his disciples. One day, Vashishta decided to do an intense tapasya and went far away from his ashrama, leaving his beautiful cow Nandini and her calf back at the ashrama. Those days, there were the 8 Vasu brothers. The 8 Vasu brothers were said to be gods, even higher than Devaloka, who would traverse the skies and the universe in their vimanas. There were great descriptions of the vimana which used to be called crystal vimanas. And these crystal vimanas used to be so smooth that you could see through them. There were descriptions of the vimanas in the Mahabharata which used to resemble like a spaceship of today. And the Vasu brothers with their wives would go through the galaxies and the cosmos in these vimanas. There were 8 of them. The eldest was Prithu, probably a derivation of the word Prithvi. The youngest was Prabhasa or Dew. When they were passing the Meru mountain, they noticed this beautiful ashrama and this Nandini cow with its teat full of divine milk. And they stopped there. One of the wives of one of the Vasus, Prabhasa's wife, saw this divine cow and had an instant attraction towards the cow and told her husband and his brothers, I want this cow. Prithu said, no, this is a divine cow. Its teat has milk which will make a human immortal. We don't need to be drinking that milk. We are already immortal. We are not going to die. We've been here from the time of the beginning of earth. Far before that, they say the Vasus were there from the beginning of the universe itself. And we will be here for a long time. We don't need to drink that milk. Why take that cow? And then that wife of Prabhasa said, no, I want the cow to give the milk to my friend who is a princess on earth. She is my best friend. I want to spend the rest of my life with her. I know she will die soon, a normal mortal death, if she stays on earth, but I want this milk for her so that she will be with me for the rest of my life. And Prithu said, no, we don't need to take this cow. We shouldn't. It doesn't belong to us. It's probably sage Vasishta's. And then she got angry. She started humiliating her husband and his brothers. She started calling in question their manhood, saying, what men are you if you are scared of a sage? He's just a rishi in the forest. We are the great Vasus. Why are you all scared? What is wrong with you? And Prabhasa got enraged and said, yes, I will have the guts to do it. The others told him no, but he said no, and they took the cow, Nandini, and her calf into their Vimana or spaceship and went away. Deep in penance in the forest, sage Vasishtha immediately realized that his Nandini has been stolen, and using his divine consciousness, a power that he had developed over thousands of years of tapasya. Yes, these divine rishis used to live for 3 and 4 and 5,000 years. And through these years of tapasya, the rishi determined that it was the Vasu brothers who had taken his cow and the calf. Immediately, with his consciousness, he cursed them that they would all be born on earth as mortal humans and live a horrible life on earth and die on earth and lose their place in the skies. Far out in the galaxy, the Vasus suddenly realized that they've been cursed, that something is drawing them back to Bhuloka, and they might have to spend the rest of their life in Bhuloka as mortal human beings. They immediately came back to Vasishtha's ashram and begged his forgiveness. They gave back Nandini and her calf and said, we are sorry. It was a grave mistake. We stole a crime we should never have committed. Please forgive us. Over time, Vasishtha's anger cooled down and he said, yes, I do wish to forgive you, but my curse cannot be reversed. But I can dilute it a little. And he said that the 7 elder Vasus, who would have to be born on earth, would live very short lives on earth. They would not live a long life. And they could go back to being the Vasus and go back to the stars and be the Vasus who roam the cosmos. But the youngest of them all, Prabhasa or Dyu, who actually stole the cow, who actually committed the crime, he would have to live a life on earth. And then he told them, go to Ganga, go to Jahnavi. She too has been cursed to live a life on earth. Go to her. Ask her to be your mother. For she is also an immortal soul, a pure soul. Ask her to be your mother and ask her to keep your lives as short as possible. And so saying, the Vasu brothers went to Ganga and told Ganga, oh mother, take us as your child. Oh dear Ganga, take us as your child and give us birth, but keep our lives short. And Ganga said, okay, I shall do what I can. And then Ganga looked at Shantanu and said, and this, O great King Shantanu, is how I have come down here to be your wife. And these 7 children who I cast into the Ganga were the Vasu brothers who were destined to have a short life on earth. I wanted to spend the rest of my life with you, O Mahabhisha, O Mahabhisheka, O Shantanu, for I truly love you and I have never loved anyone ever, and I doubt I will love anyone ever again. But you have broken your oath. If you had allowed me to cast this 8th child into the river, I would have spent the rest of your mortal life with you, next to you, and in your arms. Shantanu broke down in tears, and as he stood Ganga started rising at the edge of the river, and the river seemed to merge with Ganga, and Ganga seemed to merge with the river Ganga. And Shantanu could see the ripples of the river go through his wife Ganga. And with his child in his arms, he told Ganga, "Can you not stay? Can you not live on here?" And Ganga said, "No, you have broken the oath, and I have to go." Then he asked her, "Can you not come back? Can you not come back secretly, and we shall come and spend quiet moments together secretly in each other's company, that nobody in the three worlds shall ever know?" And Ganga said the immortal words, "There is nothing that can ever remain a secret, ever in Bhuloka. The things will eventually come out." And they still do. But Ganga said, "I'll do one thing for you, king. Give me this child. We will call him Devavrata or Gangadatta as my child. I will take him with me. Devaloka has some of the best rishis and teachers, and I will ensure that he is taught by them in Devaloka. When he is 16, come down here to the river, and I shall hand over your son to you, fully trained to take care of the Kuru Empire. He shall lead the Kuru Empire to its greatest victories ever. He shall widen the boundaries of the Kuru Empire to include all of undivided Bharatavarsha. His name shall live on, and your name shall live on with him. For as long as the sun and the moon are there in the sky, let me take this child and give it back when bring him back when he is 16. Let me take Devavrata, O great King Shantanu." And Shantanu handed over this beautiful child to Ganga, and Ganga disappeared into the river Janvi. For 16 years, Shantanu brooded. He would take care of his kingdom and go hunting. And every now and then, when he was tired, he would come to the banks of the river Janvi, lay his arms in the flowing waters of the Ganga, and enjoy the river and think about those beautiful times he spent with her in the palace. In those days, he would also remember his past life as Mahabhisha or Mahabhisheka, and remember that love he shared with Ganga in that life too. And 16 years passed, and expectantly one day, through his hunt, he came back on the banks of the river Ganga. And he went to the river to quench his thirst, and he realized that Ganga was no longer there. That huge, sparkling river, whose far bank you couldn't even see, which was so wide that you couldn't see the other side of the river, had flowed to a trickle. And the empty river bank stared back at him, and he didn't know what happened. There was just a trickle of water flowing through. And then Shantanu walked up the river bank to see what had blocked the river's flow. The mighty river Ganga herself blocked. And there he saw a beautiful, handsome man, a young boy, a strapping young lad, with a quiver full of arrows and a bow that was resplendent like the river herself. And he was shooting arrows at remarkable speed into the river and creating a dam. And as the river broke one part, in all her torrid fury, he would let loose another slew of arrows on the river and would block that part. And this went on, and it was a fight between the river Ganga and this boy, where Ganga would break through. He would send a whole set of arrows to block her back again. And seeing Shantanu come, he ran away and hid in the woods. In amazement, Shantanu stood at the banks of the Ganga, which would never be blocked. And here she lay blocked. And suddenly from the river, That beautiful woman appeared just as she appeared 20 years back or 25 years back when he first saw her on her banks. And she came up to him and said, "You remember me, O king? I'm Janvi." She looked a little different now, but she was the same Ganga who was married to Shantanu. And then she called out to this boy Devavrata in that ancient tongue which they say existed from the time the earth began. And this young, smart, handsome boy Devavrata came shyly and stood in front of Shantanu. And Ganga said, "O King Shantanu, this is your young son Devavrata. As per my promise, I have brought him to you today. He is an excellent warrior. He has been trained in the Vedas and Vedangas by the great sage Vishwamitra himself. He has been trained in the art of politics by the great sage Brihaspati. Brihaspati, who is the guru of the Devas themselves, who is Indra's guru. He's been trained in politics by Brihaspati himself. And I specially went to the great Bhargava Parashurama, who was an Amsha or an avatar of Vishnu himself, Narayana himself, who had sworn to kill the entire Kshatriya race, who had rid the earth of the Kshatriyas 7 times and who had sworn enmity against all Kshatriyas. I took your son to him and begged him to teach Devavrata. And he agreed only because it was me, because he knew Devavrata was a Kshatriya prince. And the great Bhargava Parashurama himself taught Devavrata all the art of war. Parashurama has given Devavrata all the great astras. In Devaluka, the various devas have handed over their astras to Devavrata. And today, Devavrata is an accomplished soldier, an accomplished warrior, in complete knowledge of the astras that could possibly be found anywhere in either Devaloka or Bhuloka. Take him, O Shantanu. Take Devavrata with you and let him help you rule over Hastinapur. And so saying, Ganga disappeared into the river Janvi. Shantanu was overwhelmed. He hugged his young, handsome son Devavrata, and arm in arm they walked into the chariot that he came in and went to Hastinapur. We shall continue in the next episode. Om Namah Shivaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Amme Narayana. Om Anjaneyaya Namah. Om Ganeshaya Namah. Om Nagendraya Namah. Om Gurave Namah.